For over 3,000 years, Jerusalem has been the backdrop of epic legends. A place where stories and structures helped shape civilizations.
And every stone bears a story that concerns all of us.
Since antiquity, the most prestigious architects of the Mediterranean basin have worked to make this isolated city one of the jewels of the Middle East. In the heart of the city, the Romans built an immense religious complex, constructing an entire mountain in order to see through the reconstruction of the temple that had carried such importance in Judaism. To create this architectural wonder, they developed ingenious methods to transport the enormous blocks of stone.
The biggest single stone is estimated to weigh 400 tons.
Hundreds of years later, Emperor Constantine erected one of the first large Christian churches in the center of the city, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, built around the tomb of Christ.
He was motivated by this new religion, and the origin of said religion was Jerusalem.
This city, the soul of Christianity for nearly 300 years, constantly reinvented itself, one conquest after the next. As times changed, it would also become home to one of the marvels of Muslim architecture.
Le Dôme du Rocher est une réplique.
Dome of the Rock was the Islamic Empire's response to the Constantinian Church of the Holy Sepulchre and its dome, which represented the symbol of Christianity in Jerusalem.
From the Temple Mount to the Dome of the Rock, how were these ambitious buildings constructed? How have they managed to survive through ages of earthquakes, wars, and conquests? From one hilltop to another, one civilization to the next, we will penetrate the heart of Jerusalem's most iconic buildings, which bear witness to 3,000 years of history and mystery. Today, we will lift the veil on the secrets of the eternal city and its holy builders. In the heart of the Judean mountains, Jerusalem, the world's ultimate holy city, has stood proudly for more than 3,000 years. This city is of vital importance to all three of the main monotheistic religions. Located atop a mountain ridge at the meeting point between the desert and the Mediterranean, it is home to the most symbolic places of the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim religions.
This is the meeting point of heaven and earth. This is the place where you have divine interaction with the human, that connection, and that's why Jerusalem has remained important in the three Abrahamic faiths.
For nearly 2,000 years, Jewish people from all over the world have been praying at the foot of the Wailing Wall, the last vestige of the ancient temple. Simultaneously, more and more Christians are coming to visit the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where Jesus died. And the Muslims believe the stone protected by the Dome of the Rock played an integral part in one of the most important episodes in the Quran. For all these reasons and more, Jerusalem is an ideal place to trace the evolution of major civilizations through history.
For archaeologists, here in Jerusalem, you have every aspect of archaeology. All the periods, all the structures, synagogues, mosques, churches, private houses, burial tombs, and many, many more. Here, everything happened, and every stone bears a story that concerns all of us. And this is the magic.
According to the Old Testament, the story began in the first millennium BC, when David, the king of the Israelites, and an important biblical figure, conquered Jerusalem and threw out the local population. At the time, it was a dry area on the edge of the desert that opened out onto the Mount of Olives in the east. He chose this site because he believed it was close to where another important biblical event had taken place: the sacrifice of Isaac.
The original area of the settlement of Jerusalem, this little southeastern hill or city of David, is dominated to the north by a high outcrop of bedrock, which comes later to be called the Temple Mount. Now, this spot in Jewish and later also in Christian and Muslim tradition is significant because it comes to be identified with Mount Moriah, which is the spot where, according to the Hebrew Bible, Abraham prepared to offer his son Isaac for sacrifice.
The era of the great builders of Jerusalem began right after the death of King David, with his son Solomon. In 966 BC, he started building the first holy Jewish temple. The monument was naturally built on top of the famous Mount Moriah, known as the Temple Mount. The first Jewish temple was comprised of three distinct spaces: the porch, called the Ulam, the Hekel, or sanctuary, and the Debir, the Holy of Holies. The Bible mentions two columns covered in bronze framing the main doorway, while the Holy of Holies contained the Ark of the Covenant, placed there by David himself. This gold-covered chest contained the stone tablets of the law that were handed down to Moses, the holiest objects in the Jewish religion, lost for many centuries. The building was 20 cubits wide, 60 cubits long, and 30 cubits high, or around 10 meters wide, 28 meters long, and 14 meters high. It may not seem very large today, but at the time and in the region, a monument this size attracted a lot of attention.
Jerusalem was a tiny city. It really was more of a small town, if you can even call it that. I mean, if you have this quote-unquote city that's so small in size and in population, then a building that measures 10 meters wide by 35 meters long is going to be a big building. In relation to everything else in Jerusalem, it was a large building.
Word of the new temple quickly spread throughout the region. At the start of the first millennium BC, the population increased from just 700 to 2,000 inhabitants. The region of Jerusalem rose in power and prosperity under the rule of several different kings. But this was not to last. The first major break in the history of the city occurred after just a few hundred years. In August of 586 BC, the powerful Babylonian dynasty from the east moved into the Judean territory, entered the city, ransacked it, and destroyed the Temple of Solomon. The city was now part of the Babylonian Empire. Not long after, it was taken over by the Persians, then the Macedonians led by Alexander the Great. In 141 BC, the Jewish people revolted and founded the Hasmonean dynasty. It did not last long, however. In 63 BC, Jerusalem was conquered by General Pompey, thus falling into the hands of the great Roman Empire. This was a turning point for the city. A few years after the conquest, one of the leading figures of Jerusalem's history came into power. Herod the Great, a renowned builder and bloodthirsty despot.
Herod is known as the single greatest builder in the history of Israel, in the history of the country. No other individual has left a lasting imprint on the landscape of the country than Herod. He built all over the place.
Herod would have a lasting effect on Jerusalem's urban design. His plans for the city reflected the size of his own ego. His largest architectural undertaking was the gigantic Temple Mount. In 22 BC, he decided to rebuild the Temple of Solomon to gain favor with the Jewish population.
Herod was a cruel ruler, very cruel, very hard and harsh with his people, especially with the Jewish population. But according to the legend, at some point he understood that he needs to be good to his people, to the Jewish people.
Herod was also modeling himself after David and Solomon. That is, he's lining himself up just as Solomon built the first temple. So Herod is sort of setting himself up as a legitimate successor to David and Solomon by rebuilding the temple.
Overcome with ambition, Herod decided that simply renovating or replacing the old temple was not enough. He wanted to build something that would leave a mark on history and raise him up onto a monumental pedestal. To that end, he would need to remodel the entirety of Mount Moriah.
When King Herod decided around 22 BC that he's going to build a temple, he decided that he will be done something megalomaniac. It will be huge. And all of the surrounding area will be enormous. But Herod had a problem because the topography of Mount Moriah, it's very narrow. It could hold the modest temple, but could not hold this magnificent and large structure. So he did something very smart. Change the topography of Mount Moriah, create an artificial platform.
This builder without equal decided to artificially extend Mount Moriah from its summit to create a gigantic esplanade. Using previous constructions, he built a massive retaining wall. This platform, overlooking the mountain, was designed to support the rest of the structure. The walls were up to 30 meters high and went as far as 20 meters below ground level, for a total height of 50 meters in certain segments. The existing square plaza, spanning 250 by 250 meters, was extended to the north, south, and west for a total surface area of 280 by 490 meters.
Romans like to build, but even they, in the scale of the Roman architecture, even Romans who visit the Temple Mount said, listen guys, this is something special. The Temple Mount was something unique.
With this inordinately sized project, Herod sought to build not just a religious center, but also a public place for business and trade. He had to keep that function in mind when designing the structure. According to Herod's plans, the temple occupied the central position. To the south, he had a large gate built, the royal stoa, where people could exchange currency or buy animals to sacrifice at the temple. To the north, the Antonia fortress surveyed the rest of the complex. These public buildings surrounded a trapezoidal esplanade measuring 144,000 square meters. the equivalent of 12 soccer fields, a space that was accessible to all. The large size meant that anyone could move from one gate to another without having to cross through the sanctuary, which was reserved for people of the Jewish faith.
The esplanade is very impressive in terms of size. It feels like a city within a city. When you see the scale of the project and try to imagine the construction site with all the various craftsmen hard at work, you understand it was a massive undertaking.
More than 10,000 builders worked on this unprecedented expansion of the Temple Mount. But the project had to respect one very important constraint. The temple had to remain in service at all times. To Herod, even a temporary closure was out of the question. So they had to build quickly and intelligently in order to preserve access for the pilgrims.
The Roman Empire were experts in engineering, in architecture, and for sure, Herod, which was the friend of the Romans, used those Roman experts in planning all of this area. But of course, you can see from archaeology, you can see that from the ancient scriptures that apart from the Roman expert, there is the stamp of King Herod itself.
In order to complete the project as quickly and efficiently as possible, Herod undoubtedly had to build the retaining walls segment by segment.
In order to build this large complex, you need to start with the corners, because they are the key to stabilize all the compound. If you look at the corners of the Wailing Wall, you can see there are huge stones combined like this. So we started for the corners and then connected all the walls and all the dots.
Construction likely began with the southeast wall. Here, the remains of an ancient supporting wall from the 2nd century BC can still be seen today. By building the eastern wall first, the workers were able to connect the old wall to the new Herodian wall.
There is a very distinct break between the old esplanade and the one Herod built, where you can see what's clearly a line in the wall. So we know the whole southern part was added as well as the western part.
Today, the famous Wailing Wall is the last trace of this gigantic architectural project spearheaded by Herod. As one walks along the retaining wall, one cannot help but be impressed by the size of the stones that were used to build it. The best way to appreciate their size is by observing the blocks that have fallen off the wall south of the esplanade.
Some of the stones weigh hundreds of tons. And they are well made, they are very accurate. There is less than 1 millimeter between the stones. It's amazing. Even today, we could not duplicate or build in such techniques.
Most of the blocks that make up the 37 rows of the walls weigh anywhere between 2 and 5 tons. But the most impressive are hidden from onlookers' eyes. It is inside the Wailing Wall and its basement that the most imposing stones were found.
The biggest single stone is estimated to weigh 400 tons. It's just giganormous.
This large stone used in the retaining wall of the Temple Mount is the 4th largest and heaviest ever transported during antiquity.
Over 13 meters long, the monumental stone is part of the foundation of the structure. Its base. It is placed in a spot where the wall exerts a particularly high amount of pressure. The massive scale of these foundations attests to the size and ambition of King Herod's project. He would need stones that were sufficiently strong to withstand the pressure over time. Thousands of them. Fortunately, Jerusalem is surrounded by limestone mountains. The army of builders assembled by Herod could harvest stone from ancient quarries and also create new ones closer to the construction site. Jerusalem stone, which is typical of the region, is a gray-yellow limestone of very high quality. There is an abundance of it in the quarries nearby the city.
This type of limestone transforms under pressure into a sort of marble. It's a very sturdy vein of stone.
Open-air quarries were exploited less than 5 kilometers from the construction site. But the workers also turned to ancient quarries located directly underneath the city, the so-called Solomon's quarries. This gigantic cave extended to the northern edge of the ramparts, right next to the Temple Mount. No matter the location, the goal was always the same: to quarry the best quality stone possible.
If you have good quality rock directly at surface level, you can create what's called an open-air quarry, which means it doesn't have a roof. You don't need to work underground. You simply start at ground level and work your way down, bit by bit. If you don't have good quality rock at surface level, sometimes you can find better quality rock underneath. In that case, you'll need to create an underground mine and start digging underneath the surface.
The traces left by the quarry workers can still be seen today. To extract the cut stones, the workers, known as quarrymen, started by making fine notches in the rock to mark the sides and depth of the block using a pickaxe. Then they placed corners inside those notches to force the rock to break at the back of the block. After that, the quarry workers could pull the block out of its position inside the rock, breaking its fall using a pile of rubble underneath. After being extracted, the raw stones were carved into a smooth rectangular shape. But the job was far from finished. Each block used to form the gigantic retaining wall weighed between 2 and 10 tons. How did the builders transport such large pieces of stone to the construction site at the end of the 1st century BC? First, they had to raise the stones out of the quarries. The architects had a solid understanding of pulley systems. They used what is commonly known as a lifting jack. This system consists of 2 beams connected at the top and held in place by cables anchored in the ground. A pulley is suspended and a rope is threaded through it so it can be maneuvered using a hoist. With the more advanced systems, they could lift blocks weighing up to 800 kilograms. For heavier loads, they used a tread wheel instead of a crank handle. This human-sized wheel inside the framework was powered by the workers themselves. Next, they had to attach the stone securely. To do so, the works notably used tenons or wedges carved directly into the blocks. Once the stones were lifted up to ground level, They had to be transported to the construction site.
Because of the terrain, they created the stone quarries to the north so they wouldn't need to cross any valleys or go up any slopes. From the north, it took minimal effort to transport the rock downhill to the monument they were building.
For smaller stones, Herod's builders could simply place wooden dowels under the blocks and then roll them along. For heavier loads, they also used a system of wooden wheels in which the blocks were placed like axles. These methods, however ingenious, had their limitations given the excessive scope of the project. Some of the stones used for the foundations weighed more than 10 or even 100 tons.
The process used to move these enormously heavy blocks was more complex. First, they needed a flat surface, because if the ground was sloped too steeply downward, the stone could slip out of control. If the ground was sloped upward, it would take too much effort to push, so they needed the perfect slope. They created a sort of artificial embankment to maintain that horizontality. It was calculated very carefully.
A series of earth platforms aimed at transport were built between the quarry and the construction site. In order to move the blocks along this newly flat terrain, several systems of winches were anchored directly in the artificial ground. Multiple groups of workers would activate the hoists simultaneously from different positions along the path, thereby multiplying their strength and enabling them to slide the stone along the surface. The construction site was also covered with backfill so that each stone would reach the exact right level. This enabled them to build each level of the wall bit by bit before clearing out the excess soil at the end. Using these simple yet ingenious physical principles, Herod's workers were able to move some of the largest pieces of stone in the antique Mediterranean world. But with the mountainous terrain around Jerusalem making transport so difficult, why such determination to build this record-breaking monument? The largest stones of the gigantic retaining wall of the Temple Mount are found underground. They are not visible to onlookers, so all the efforts they required were not designed to impress visitors.
The stability of the walls and the compound is due to the fact that Herod or the builders use enormous blocks of stones. Some of them weighed hundreds of tons, and until today it's untouchable. Jerusalem had many earthquakes, many wars, and many destructions. Still, it stands until today. Herod succeeded in his project.
It is indeed the weight of the stone blocks that makes the retaining wall so strong. But Herod could also rely on the skill of his builders to ensure the monument would hold up through the ages.
The accuracy of putting each stone near each other, every course of the stone goes back 1 centimeter. It's a dry building without cement. All of these functions were made to stabilize the compound and the walls.
In order to achieve this great architectural feat, the stone carvers used a special chiseling technique known today as Herodian stone dressing. This technique consisted in leaving the middle parts of the blocks flat and raised, while carving narrow, very shallow borders around the edges.
The purpose of the borders was to give the blocks very clear edges, so that when they were placed side by side, you could confirm that everything was a perfect fit.
So it's a functional reason. But there is a theory that it has also an aesthetic reason, because if you look from far away, those margins and the bosses play with light and shadow, and it's more emphasized from far away the sacredness, the light of the Temple Mount.
Another part of what makes the wall so sturdy is its foundations. In order to withstand the many earthquakes that struck the city over the centuries, the architects decided to build the foundations of the wall on the bedrock, a stronger layer of rock found deeper underground. Herod's workers sometimes dug as much as 20 meters below ground level to reach the bedrock and thereby ensure the construction would be stable. Little by little, the builders used the soil that had been cleared to fill in the inside of the wall and artificially extend the summit of Temple Mount, thus providing a base for the esplanade. But there was a problem. The backfill exerted a huge amount of pressure on the walls, especially in the southeast corner, where the wall is the highest. Despite the solidity of the construction, it was essential that this pressure be relieved. Herod hence decided to build several vaulted rooms inside the esplanade, so that instead of it being filled with soil, it would have a quasi-honeycomb structure.
It enabled them to lighten the structure and control the architecture of the wall. That's why we have the famous rooms that are known today as Solomon's Stables.
Work on this legendary monument began around 20 BC. It continued until 63 AD, long after the death of Herod himself. After more than 80 years of work, which occupied generations of builders, the plaza Herod had dreamed of finally towered over the city. It would bring fame to the Temple Mount complex and allow it to survive many conquests through the years. Thanks to this monumental project, Jerusalem grew and developed, becoming a major regional hub. People flocked from all over the Roman Empire, and pilgrimages to the temple attracted crowds of faithful followers.
Those people are coming into the city and they're bringing with them money to pay for, accommodations and food and tour guides and souvenirs and of course the sacrifices that are being offered at the temple. So it's actually a huge moneymaker from the point of view of economics. So it all worked out very well.
In just a few hundred years, the population increased tenfold. The city was now home to more than 20,000 people. This era also coincided with the appearance of a person who would forever change the history of Jerusalem. A major figure in the Bible and of our shared history, Jesus Christ. The city was the backdrop for his final days and the Passion of Christ. His famous trial took place in one of the towers of the palace built by Herod, and his way of the cross took him through the streets of Jerusalem to Golgotha. Pilgrims still walk in his footsteps along the famous Via Dolorosa today. A dismal period followed. A few years later, in 70 AD, The temple built by Herod was ransacked and destroyed by the Romans during a Jewish revolt. For nearly 200 years, Jerusalem lost its status as a holy city. Under Roman occupation, it was relegated to the status of a provincial military city. The Jews were chased out of the city once again, and the religion of Christ was still considered a cult. In the year 312, the situation began to change. Roman Emperor Constantine the Great converted to Christianity, and the cult became a bona fide religion. A few years later, in 324, the Roman Empire in the east separated from the Roman Empire in the west to become the Byzantine Empire, in which Christianity would play a crucial role.
Constantine was convinced that Christianity could replace the declining pagan religion, which was dying out, and that he could use it to consolidate his power. He was driven by this new religion and wanted to find its epicenter and origin. That origin was Jerusalem.
Constantine wanted to restore the city's religious character by turning it into a capital of Christianity. So he decided to create one of the world's first Christian churches on the site where Christ was crucified. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre. With its immense dome, more than 36 meters across, and its 56-meter-long basilica, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre would be the largest building in the city. Before anything else, the emperor ordered his troops to find the place where Jesus was presumed to have been crucified, along with his tomb. This was a major challenge. For the past 2 centuries, his predecessors had been striving to erase every trace of Jesus and his followers. The site, located outside the city walls, was originally a quarry, carved out of the slopes of the hill of Golgotha. After the quarry was abandoned, the Romans used it to perform their executions. This is where Jesus Christ is said to have been crucified. After that, the quarry was progressively turned into a necropolis, and several tombs were carved out of the rock, including the one presumed to belong to Christ. Finally, Emperor Hadrian, who ruled 200 years before Constantine, had the quarry cleared out and leveled to erase any traces of Judeo-Christian religions. In its place, he created a large promenade where he built a Roman temple honoring Aphrodite.
In order to find these early traces of Christianity, Constantine sent out his best sleuths to find the places he was looking for. In religion, one of the main sources of information is the oral transmission of locations. Places don't move. Sometimes they're decorated differently in accordance with tradition, but there's a kind of immobility that made it possible for Constantine to find these sites. By wanting to destroy them, Hadrian actually preserved them.
The emperor had the site cleared, revealing the original terrain and thus the location of what was presumed to be Jesus' tomb. Construction of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre began around this symbolic site in 325. First, Constantine had the hill across Golgotha carved out to isolate the tomb. Around the tomb, he used the stones that were extracted to build a rotunda topped with a cupola, known as the Anastasis. To the east, a basilica called a martyrium was erected, with a total length of 45 meters. The 2 buildings were separated by a patio, representing the biblical garden, granting access to the boulder of Golgotha. The entrance to the complex was on the main street east of the basilica and consisted of a monumental triple door. All these buildings together form the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It offers pilgrims a unique experience to honor Christ's memory by reliving his passion. his crucifixion at Golgotha, then his burial and resurrection at the site of his tomb, the ultimate relic.
Il faut imaginer que de tout temps,
You have to imagine that the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was visited by a constant flow of pilgrims who came to experience this direct contact with the origins of their religious beliefs.
monumentaliser,
The architects had to turn it into a monument and protect the relic, placing it in the center of the building, but they also had to channel this flow of
qu'on
people.
puisse canaliser ce flux.
Today, a few steps and column pedestals are all that remain. Most of the marble also dates back to the Byzantine era. But the sources all agree that the building left a lasting impression on every visitor.
On sait par les textes
We have written documents saying that there were marble floors and gold-plated wood ceilings.
en bois,
There were candelabras and wall hangings everywhere.
les tentures,
These written accounts from the pilgrims are an invaluable source of information. Because they were so amazed by what they saw, they didn't want to forget anything, so they wrote highly detailed accounts.
ils écrivent beaucoup.
The Church of the Holy Sepulchre was completed in 335. In building it, Constantine had created one of the first models of a Christian holy place. Jerusalem then entered a period of prosperity that would last nearly 300 years. It was the epicenter of the Christian religion, and thousands of pilgrims from all different backgrounds came to visit. But a few centuries later, in 614, the first Persian invasion marked the start of a new era for the city, whose fate was about to change once again. In 571, the birth of Prophet Muhammad in Mecca heralded the arrival of Islam in the Middle East. The Muslim armies quickly conquered the region and extended their power. In 638, Jerusalem capitulated to the armies of Caliph Omar, a companion of Muhammad's, and Jerusalem became a Muslim city.
The conquest of Jerusalem didn't have much importance on a military level.
En revanche,
However, the Arab conquerors were fully aware of the symbolic value of the city they had taken.
Islam was a blend of past traditions. It rested on the writings of the Bible and recognized both Jewish and Christian prophets. The conquerors wanted to restore the Temple Mount to its previous religious importance as quickly as possible. When Omar's armies arrived in Jerusalem, the gigantic esplanade had been abandoned for hundreds of years. It had been intentionally left in ruins by the Christians in favor of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This is where the Caliph decided to build one of the first mosques in Jerusalem, on the site where the Al-Aqsa Mosque stands today. But the real jewel of this new style of Islamic art would be built in the center of the esplanade, on the site of the former temple, the Dome of the Rock. It was built in the late 7th century, making it the oldest Islamic building still standing in near-perfect condition today. Its architecture is impressive in its precision. The size of the sanctuary was determined primarily by the rocky outcropping in the center of the building, where Jewish writings hold that Abraham sacrificed his son. An initial circle was traced around said rock. Then a square was inscribed within that circle. The sides of the square faced the 4 cardinal directions. Next, a second square was drawn at right angles to the first. When the sides of these squares were extended, the points of intersection defined the octagon that would form the first ambulatory, a passage marked on either side by a series of columns. In the same way, the intersections created by the extension of the sides of the octagon defined the perimeter of the second circle, which in turn defined the placement of the outer wall. The outer wall encapsulated a second ambulatory. The geometry of the building was borderline perfection. 24 columns support the first octagon, and 16 columns support the central tambour. The Dome of the Rock is an example of a perfectly balanced architectural design. Nothing about its shape or layout was left to chance. The circle symbolizes the celestial world, the square portrays the earthly world, and the octagon represents the intersection of the two. But as it takes center stage on the Temple Mount, it clearly evokes Byzantine architecture as well.
The Dome of the Rock was also a response to the Constantinian Basilica of the Holy Sepulchre and the dome that crowned its Church of the Resurrection. It was the Islamic Empire's response to the most iconic monument to Christianity in Jerusalem.
Neither mosque nor palace, but rather a sanctuary, the building remains very enigmatic. The only certainty is that it was of great symbolic importance. The Dome of the Rock was built on the site where Herod's temple was believed to have stood, and probably even reused some of the stones from the old temple. Geographically, it overlooks the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which was previously the largest building in Jerusalem. The dome was both a symbol of Islam's superiority over other religions and an attempt to synthesize them.
With the Dome of the Rock, Islam effectively became the new dominant religion in Jerusalem. It also proclaimed Islam as the religion of the empire.
One Muslim dynasty followed another, reigning over Jerusalem for more than 500 years. But at the turn of the new millennium, the city's prosperity was put at risk by a new leader. In 1009, Al-Hakim, nicknamed the Mad Caliph, called for the Church of the Holy Sepulchre to be destroyed. This news spread to the West, laying the groundwork for the Crusades. In 1096, Pope Urban II issued a call to reconquer the Holy Land. 3 years later, the Catholic armies finally began to approach the city.
When the Crusaders arrived in Jerusalem, you have to realize that they had left Europe several years before. The group had crossed the entire Byzantine Empire from west to east, fighting along the way. By the time they reached their destination, they were starving and exhausted. Thus began their horrific killing spree that was well documented in historical records. It was an outlet for their exhaustion and the violence of the trip.
Once the city had been conquered, the Crusaders ordered churches to be built all over the city. The Church of St. Anne, Chapel of the Ascension, Church of the Flagellation. But the newcomers' primary focus was the destroyed Church of the Holy Sepulchre, Jesus' tomb, which they wanted to restore to its former glory.
What's interesting is that the Crusaders had the opportunity to redesign the Holy Sepulchre, but they were restricted by the city that had been built up around it since Constantine.
The Crusaders thus had to rebuild the Holy Sepulchre on top of its own ruins, doing their best to bring it up to their new European standards. A new monumental dome was erected above what was believed to be Jesus' tomb, and the édicule directly around the tomb was renovated. To reflect the layout of the contemporary European churches of the time, they decided to unify the three distinct spaces of the original Constantinian church. The anastasis, the atrium, and the basilica were combined into a single building. The Crusaders also carved a monumental gate into the south wall, offering direct access to the area where masses were celebrated. The church, in the modern sense of the word, was now at the heart of the building. The decoration inside has remained unchanged for 9 centuries. A hybrid style that reflects the intersection of Europe and the Middle East.
It's a blend of Roman or Latin architecture and more Eastern-inspired decorations, which benefited from the expertise of true local artisans, in particular mosaicists, who decorated the new buildings constructed by the Latins.
This building, which would become much more than just a church, had its own unique layout. It was here, in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, that the kings of Jerusalem would display the link between religion and power in a veritable liturgy. The rule of the Crusaders would not last for long, however. A mere century after their arrival, the city was taken back by Saladin's army in 1187.
It was only a short chapter in Jerusalem's history, but it had a lasting effect on its organization and its architecture. It's important to note that the old city as we know it today is still contained within the confines of the city as it was at the time of the Crusades.
With this final church, the Crusaders left their mark on the urban landscape of Jerusalem forevermore. Over the centuries, Jerusalem has grown from a simple agricultural outcropping to a city of great importance. A city that has embodied the major spiritual and political issues of its time throughout history. Here, more than anywhere else in the world, religion has shaped the city, resulting in lively, cosmopolitan neighborhoods. But above all, these majestic buildings. They have survived through the ages and continue to reveal their secrets today.
Every day, it's a new day for us, the archaeologists in Jerusalem. Every day we find, we expose, we see something new that we didn't been aware of.
Like so many treasures of Middle Eastern culture, these works stand as a testament to the city's history. They represent a long continuity of cultures and civilizations. Each building echoes the others and the people who built them.
It's a melting pot of humanity. It's dizzying to think about.
From atop its hill, more than 3,000 years after it was founded, and today more than ever, Jerusalem deserves its nickname of the Eternal City.